what people need as we head into a no-deal Brexit either.
Deputy Ruth Coppinger, please.
You agree, particularly in all buildings used by the public and by children. 2 community centres in Dublin 15, Huntstown and Hartstown, have both written to politicians about considerable sums of money that they need for fire safety works in order to remain open in the future. These centres are invaluable. They provide everything from childcare facilities to bingo, youth clubs, Zumba, martial arts and even places of worship. While they're both in my constituency and yours, I doubt very much they're unique and that this must be a national issue. In both Hartstown and Huntstown, the communities have rallied in the past and they will do so again. In fact, it was the communities themselves who took the initiative to establish centres in the first place, with campaigns like Buy a Brick or weekly donations. A silver lining to the cloud has been the emergence of younger activists who want to now keep their community centres open for their children. But Taoiseach, there's only so much backpacking that can be done. Only so many Strictly's or 5Ks or race nights or quizzes. At a certain point, the state has to actually step in and acknowledge the vital role that community centres provide. Margaret Thatcher once said, "There's no such thing as society. There are individual men and women, and people must look after themselves." Is this your maxim too? Or do you appreciate the role of community centres in society? Huntstown Community Centre, for example, provide breakfasts for vulnerable children who attend the school next door. They help 5 homeless families wash their clothes and get a hot meal in their coffee shop. Nobody asks them to. Nobody gives them extra money for doing so. They just do it because the housing crisis is hitting hard and they see the need. They get no extra money for plugging these gaps from a failure of government. Now, the voluntary and community sector was savaged during the recession, losing about 16,000 jobs, and the local community development programme was cut by 35%. One of the community managers told me, for example, that in one email in 2010 they had a cut of €32,000. So, Taoiseach, do you agree it's now time the state gives back? It also has to be pointed out that much of the works needed now are due to shoddy building regulations overseen by Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael-led governments. The Huntstown Community Centre, for example, only did work on its creche in insulating it in 2014, and now they've been told this could ignite and emit toxic fumes in a creche. So the Department of Children had a fund for fire safety. There was less than £1 million in it, and they've closed that fund now. Taoiseach, we've had school buildings closing in our community due to lack of fire safety. I'm asking you now, will you do this properly for community centres? Will you establish an audit of all community buildings and fund that audit?
Thank you, Deputy.
And will you set up a national fund for community centres all around the country to draw down funds to carry out this work? They shouldn't have to backpack to raise money for fire doors.
Thank you very much. Taoiseach.
Thanks very much, Deputy. And as you know, I'm very much aware of the issues with fire safety in both Hartstown and Huntstown Community Centre, both of which are in the constituency we share. As you know, some community centres, particularly a lot of the new ones, are owned by local authorities and controlled by local authorities. Many of the older ones are not. They're privately owned or belong to the Archdiocese, I think, in one case, owned by charities in other cases. But the Rural and Community Development Department under Minister Ring is engaged in this. I understand we've been able to find funding for Hartstown to allow them to carry out their fire safety works. I'm not sure if that's entirely sorted yet, but that work was being done a few months ago, and I'll look into Huntstown as well. I think the idea of having a national fund for community centres is a good one. It doesn't exist already, and certainly given the establishment of a dedicated department for rural and community development, it's something that we certainly could consider.
Well, Taoiseach, I'm glad you think it is a good idea and you accept that it will be needed, because this will arise in community centres all around the country. And it isn't possible for all of them to contact their TDs, to go and do individual fundraising and to draw down individual amounts of funds. The type of money that we're talking about is quite significant, actually. In both cases, it's €120,000 each that each centre needs. Now, significant funds have been raised, as said, by the local community. But you can only dip into that well to a certain point before it finishes up. And what I'm asking you to do is to make it very clear where community centre fundraising groups and management committees go. Minister Ring has agreed to do the work or to supply funds for Hartstown, but it hasn't yet been made clear how much or when or how, and it's still very much up in the air. Huntstown is only at an early stage. I would add that these are community centres that aren't run by local authorities, which most community centres aren't actually, and they're not in jet areas. They're just ordinary working class communities that have done things for themselves. And they now need you to commit that you won't let these centres close, and you'll help them by making it very clear what pathway they can get funds from.
Taoiseach, please.
I think the amount for Hartstown has been settled, but I'll check up on that. And as you say, Huntstown is still at an early stage, and that still needs to be worked on. There are funds available. There's a €1 billion fund for rural development. There's a €2 billion fund for urban regeneration, and of course local authorities have their own community funds as well, funded through the local property tax and local rates and so on. But I appreciate that this is an issue that's arisen, and I'm sure it is arising around the country, that there are community centres that need work, maybe not just fire safety work, other works as well, and it isn't clear exactly what fund you apply for, and that is a genuine problem. And that's why I think your suggestion perhaps of establishing a dedicated fund for community centres, perhaps under Minister Ring's Department of Community Development, might be a sensible way to go forward.